Okay, so today we are diving into a story about Trump, overtime pay, and some pretty intense words like scab and mentally disabled being thrown around at a political rally. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. This is a fascinating look at how something as seemingly small as a comment about overtime can become a major flashpoint in a presidential election.
Right, and this isn't some ancient history we're dredging up. This all went down just yesterday, September 29th. According to Matt Young at the Daily Beast.
Yeah, the article really centers on this Trump rally in Erie, Pennsylvania, where he makes some pretty off-the-cuff remarks about, basically hating to pay overtime at his businesses.
Hating is putting it mildly. He straight up told the crowd he'd get other people in just to avoid those extra hours. Can you imagine being a worker in that crowd and hearing your potential president say that?
It's a pretty stark contrast, right? Because he's trying to position this whole rally, this whole appearance, around his proposal to eliminate taxes on tips, something he's saying would be a huge win for the working class.
Okay, so let me get this straight. He's trying to sell himself as the champion of the working man, while casually admitting he looked for loopholes to avoid paying them fairly.
It's definitely a mixed message, and the Harris campaign definitely picked up on that.
Yeah, they did not hold back. And that word they use, scab, that's a pretty loaded term, especially in labor circles, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just a random insult. It's designed to paint Trump as someone who, betrays workers, someone who sides with management over the rank and file. And it wasn't just a quick jab on Twitter either. They went all in, putting out statements accusing him of building his entire career on screwing over workers.
So they're going after his character, his entire identity, not just his policies.
Exactly. It's one thing to disagree with someone's stance on an issue. It's another to question their fundamental character. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Even some Republicans weren't on board with the severity of his language. The article specifically mentions Senator Lindsey Graham and Representative Tom Emmer expressing some reservations.
Wow, so even some people within his own party were taken aback. That says something.
It does. When you've got members of your own party wincing at your rhetoric, you know it's crossed a line. This wasn't just partisan bickering. It was something more.
And it wasn't just the overtime comments either, right? Apparently, Trump went after Biden and Harris with some pretty harsh, pretty personal language.
Yeah, it's like this one comment about overtime pay just kind of blew the whole thing wide open,
Yeah,
Suddenly, we're not just talking about labor laws, we're talking about Trump's character, whether he really is this champion of the working class like he claims to be.
Right, it's all about image versus reality.
Yeah.
Right. And speaking of image, the article also talks about how Trump doubled down on some pretty brutal attacks on Kamala Harris at this rally.
And that's where things get really dicey. We're not just talking about policy disagreements here. He starts making these really personal attacks, even using the phrase mentally disabled at one point.
Wow. What's the strategy there? Even some Republicans, like we were saying before, seemed uncomfortable with that kind of language.
Well, it's risky, right? But it could be a way to really fire up a certain segment of his base, the people who are already inclined to dislike Harris,
Yeah.
It plays into those existing feelings.
But on the flip side, that kind of language could backfire and alienate moderate voters who were just looking for, basic human decency from their leaders.
Exactly. It's a gamble for sure. And it also sets a dangerous precedent, right? This idea that it's okay to use that kind of dehumanizing language in our political discourse, which can have a really corrosive effect on democracy as a whole.
And it wasn't just the tone of his attacks, it was the content too. The article mentions how he brought up those totally baseless claims about Harris's past, that whole thing about her summer job at McDonald's, which has been debunked over and over.
Right. It's like he's trying to tap into those pre-existing narratives and conspiracy theories that are already swirling around online, even if there's no evidence to support them.
And that's what's so frustrating, because it feeds into this whole ecosystem of misinformation and disinformation, making it almost impossible to separate fact from fiction.
And it erodes trust, right? Trust in our institutions, trust in each other. It's like we're all living in these different realities, and it becomes impossible to have a productive conversation when we can't even agree on a shared set of facts.
I know. It's exhausting even for someone like me who tries to stay informed. How is anyone supposed to make sense of it all? It's overwhelming. It really does feel like, with all the misinformation flying around, it's almost impossible to know what's real anymore,
Yeah, and the scariest part is we get so bombarded with this stuff, with all the outrage and the hyperbole, that we just become numb to it. We forget that words have power, that these attacks, even if they're not physically hurting anyone, can still have real-world consequences.
It's like, that old saying, A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. Well, these days, it feels like lies are traveling at warp speed thanks to social media.
Totally. And it's not just about debunking the lies. It's about fighting that sense of, well, what's the point? That cynicism that creeps in, that feeling of like, it's all rigged.
Yeah.
Why even bother?
So how do we escape that? How do we cut through all the noise and have meaningful conversations, actual productive conversations about the issues that really matter?
Well, I think it starts with being a little more critical about the information we consume. Like, don't just accept everything you see or hear at face value, right? Question it. Question your own biases. And try to find different perspectives, Don't just stay in your own echo chamber.
So we've got to fact check the politicians, but we also got to, fact check ourselves.
Exactly. We all have a responsibility to think critically, to engage in respectful dialogue, and to expect more, demand more from our leaders.
It's kind of wild. We started off talking about Trump's comments on overtime, and somehow we've ended up talking about, the future of democracy.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Even something that seems small, like a comment at a rally, can expose these deeper issues, these cracks in our political system. And it just goes to show how important it is to stay informed, stay engaged, and not let cynicism win.
I like the don't let cynicism win.
Yeah.
That's a good one. And that's really why we do these deep dives, right?
Really?
To step back from all the craziness, all the headlines, and really try to understand what's going on.
Absolutely. Because knowledge is power, right? The more informed we are as citizens, the better equipped we are to deal with these really complicated and, frankly, kind of scary times.
Well said. So, to our listeners out there, as we head into these final weeks before the election, pay attention to how these candidates are talking about each other, the tactics they're using. Do your own research, question your own assumptions, and most importantly, get out there and vote. Your voice matters.
Turn the dial to the daily news. Turn the dial to the daily news. Turn the dial to the daily news. Bringing voices, headlines, and shoes. We turn the dial to the daily news.